Time being now 10:40 on August 25th, 2021. I'd like to call this meeting to order of Kane County's American Rescue Plan Committee. I'm Committee Chair Jared Sanchez. Clerk, could you please call the roll? You're going to need a microphone.
Here.
Here.
Cross,
Here.
Martin,
Here.
Molina,
Molina present.
Strothman,
Strathman here.
and Sanchez.
Here. Bring that microphone closer to you if you want. If I could have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of July 9th, 2021 and July 28th, 2021.
Brown
So
moved.
moved.
Brown
Second.
moves.
Second.
Bates seconds. Any questions, comments, additions, or deletions to the minutes? Everyone should have received a copy of them a few days ago. Hearing and seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Bates,
Bates, yes.
Brown, Cross,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Strothman,
Strathman, yes.
and Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, public comments for agenda and non-agenda items. I do have, looks like one request to speak. Miss Cheryl Gray. Is Cheryl Gray here? There should be a microphone there. Do you see one? I don't
There
see
is a
those. Okay,
microphone.
there's a handheld one.
Thank you. And I can put faces to the group called the Rescuers now.
And ma'am, if you could please give us your name and your address.
Yes. My name is Cheryl Gray. I live at 108 Shoreline in St. Charles. And today I'm here representing a faith community, which is my church congregation in Elgin called Highland Avenue Church of the Brethren. And I'd like to speak to you today, you rescuers, about your process of committing these rescue funds. And my hope is that you'll use two key criteria in the use of these funds. One is that you use COVID impact to distribute the funds, and second, the urgency of need. And I question the use of the county's funds coming off the top of this first apportionment and the use of the funds in terms of COVID impact for things like a law library, court automation, the sheriff's office money laundering, and such things like the county bridges and stormwater management. I question whether that really has been related to COVID and an impact of COVID. I would like to see instead urgency for those organizations that have truly experienced an impact of COVID. For example, the social service agencies in Elgin, the Family Service Association and Eckers Center have had some real difficulty reaching those folks who have been facing mental health crises in their families. Currently, this week, we have 80 families on a waiting list to receive therapy. And if you wanted to have therapy with a Spanish-speaking counselor or therapist, it would take 6 to 8 months to be in therapy with that person because they do not have the funds to hire. If you take that out a little bit longer and look at when they would get funds through ARP, you could say it takes about 3 months to hire new staff to ramp up to meet the need. So the urgency of getting funds to social service agencies is very, very important. Eckers Center has the same sort of waiting list, about 2 months. So we have urgency and we have COVID impact with our social service agencies. I hope that you won't spend the money that's been allocated for the county's portion until after everything has been sufficiently divided for items that are based on COVID and urgency. Mental health crises can lead to many other things. Let's catch this quick. Our goal is to our goal at our church is to advocate for those funds for those people in our community who are most in need and get those funds to them urgently. And please, I know that you can do this, that you can take these funds first and you can allocate them for the county. And so my hope is that you'll do what you should do, which is rescue those organizations that have the greatest need first and not just what you can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone that would like to deliver a public comment on agenda or non-agenda items? I'll give you 2 minutes. Please come up to the microphone.
Pull your mic up closer.
Oh, is it? I could hear me. Ma'am, if you could state your name, your address, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Susan Seckner, First Congregational Church of Geneva. I live at 1010 Fabian, Geneva, Illinois. And I'm here to represent my church and the Fox River Valley Initiative. Quick story, I own a business. One of my employees, her son killed himself at the beginning of COVID. He was a personal trainer, very fit, not into drugs, very depressed after he lost his job. And on Father's Day morning, she found him shot dead. So we're advocating also for distribution of funds to things like mental health, affordable housing that's supportive, that type of thing. As far as Fox River Valley Initiative, we've had crisis stabilization units put in because of us, crisis intervention team training, affordable supportive housing. We would like to see some funding go to AID, Association for Individual Development, Hesed House, Lazarus House, Eckert Center, Family Service Association of Elgin, NAMI, National Association of Mental Health, Tri-Cities Family Services. I do know somebody that works for PADS in DuPage County. They are looking to buy a motel that they have moved all their residents to because of COVID. Obviously, that takes a serious amount of funding. That's DuPage County, not ours, but certain things like that could happen here. So hopefully we can do better, do the right thing, and do it in our own county. Thank you.
Thank you. Saw another hand go up.
Hello, I am Eileen McNamee. I am with PADS of Elgin, and I live in St. Charles, Illinois. And I'm here on behalf of the homeless. And through all of this COVID restrictions, we can only take so many pads for people to sleep on. It's only going to get worse with the moratorium on evictions. And we ask that you guys consider that putting people up into hotels and so forth and trying to have enough space for everyone. As of right now, we are starting our waiting list, and we also have a lot of families coming in. So this is something that we need to really be concerned with, and whatever we can do to help those who are most in need with these funds. Thank you.
All right. That concludes our public comment section of the meeting. Appreciate everyone for coming to speak to us. There will be a discussion item with the presentation on the social service grants that you may be interested in, whether you're able to stay here for that or watch it later on YouTube. It may address some of the issues and concerns we have facing us. Okay, moving on, Chairman's comments. I will keep this brief. I'm going to try and share my screen as little as possible. Bear with me 1 second here. There is a lot of misinformation that gets tossed around. Not all of it is worthy of addressing, but I have heard that some people think we're taking a very long time. We put the CARES Act together in a shorter period of time last year. Why are we taking so long this year? And I just thought it bears mentioning the differences between CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan Act. Difference in $10 million, which isn't great, But with the CARES Act, we had 9 months to figure out what to do with that money. This, we have 5 years. There was 18 expenditure categories in the CARES Act last year. There are 66 under the American Rescue Plan this year. Each of those expenditure categories for both plans include multiple possible eligible uses. And then with the CARES Act, we have no emphasis on equity, public engagement, or data-driven decision-making. Whereas with the American Rescue Plan, as we are all aware, there is an emphasis on equity, public engagement, and data-driven decision-making. So we do have a small team of myself, Madam Chair, some of our department heads, some of the committee members and board members that have been working hard, putting information together, putting ideas together, but it does require a large team to really adequately come up with a comprehensive plan, which is what we are moving towards. Other collar counties already have full-time staff members that are able to do these kinds of tasks and do this kind of work. So we are going through the process of obtaining some help in the form of a consultant firm and a program manager, which I'll speak to momentarily. But I just wanted to put that out there for some of the people in the public who think, well, we did it last year. Why can't we do it so quickly this year? Even with the task force dream team we had last year of Lawson, Rickert, and Hunt. I see Mr. Hunt is here today. Thank you for attending. We still wouldn't be able to put together such a comprehensive plan covering all of the details that the ARPA requires in such a short time frame. So I gave this handout to everyone. I know some people out in the public prefer physical copies. So if you encounter any of those individuals, please give them a copy of this from me. Thank you. Moving on, we're going to go to discussion items. First up, we have administrative staff update. First, I would like to introduce everyone to Jenny Smith. She is the administrative assistant for this committee and for the work that the board is doing on this. She's getting pretty well trained, I think. We had some issues. The app isn't in the system for her on the computer here, so that's why it took a little longer, and she's got to use her own laptop here today. Or I think that's the one we furnished you, isn't it? Yeah, okay, not using your own. But Jenny, as she works for Batavia and does similar functions and is very adept at what she's doing from what I've seen so far. So I just want to welcome her and introduce everyone to her. If you haven't got a chance to meet her, do say hi. Now we have two RFPs we put out last month for program manager and for a consultant firm. We are closing in on a candidate for the program manager. I was hoping to be able to make an announcement on that today, but we want to wait until everything is finalized. So at our next meeting, I will make sure that everyone gets to meet who our selected candidate is. And we are in the process of doing interviews with consultant firms. Things sometimes take a little longer than you would hope. We have some busy schedules and a lot of other things happening right now at the county, if you may not be aware of that. So we are getting there. I don't know that at our next meeting, we will have the consultant firm interviews completed and a selection made, but very quickly in the next month, we should have made some good progress on that front. Does anyone have any questions on that? I know I've talked to some of you about what's going on with that, so everyone should be pretty well apprised. Reporting update. We have a report due on August 31st, two reports, I'm sorry, our interim report and also the recovery plan report. And we are working with KEB, who did our CARES Act work for us last year. Mr. Brown had a good idea. Instead of trying to do it in-house, let's just ask the folks who have been working with us before to get this done for us. And they were so gracious to accept. And so we've been in some meetings with them recently, and they are working really hard on putting our reports together, taking the input that we've given them. So we will have those in and on time. And now our next, does anyone have any questions on the reporting? I know that's kind of like a boring aspect. Not many of you are probably very interested in, but it absorbs a bit of our time on the back end. So for lost revenue, I don't know, do we still have Mr. Onzik with us? Joe, are you there and able to speak about the lost revenue and COVID-19 related expenses, the resolutions we have coming up? Okay, well, if Joe gets back on, he can speak to those. I do have, oh, I see his microphone is unmuted. Mr. Onzik?
Yes, I'm sorry. I had a little trouble with my screen.
No worries.
Okay. Just briefly, I prepared two resolutions. One to allocate the revenue recoupment to the special revenue funds that did lose revenue as a result of the economic impact of COVID. And so this is basically taking the amount of revenue recoupment that we've allocated and then in turn allocating it to the specific special revenue funds that did lose revenue. And so it's allocated according to their share of lost revenue. And this would, it's not the full amount of lost revenue that they've experienced, but it is a portion of it and it's allocated according to their share. And so, and the reason why I focused on special revenue funds is because we've already reimbursed the general fund for its share of lost revenue from the payroll savings reimbursement that occurred in 2020. So it's only the special revenue funds that are truly have less fund balance available to provide the services that they're intended to provide as a result of the economic impact of COVID. So that's the lost revenue portion. The other resolution, I've mentioned this a few times now, so hopefully it's not new to anyone, but we had more COVID-related expenses that have continued to be incurred in 2021 that have exceeded the amount of available funding in the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And these expenses were expenses that have already been reviewed, have already been approved by the consulting firm KEB to be reimbursed from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, had there been sufficient funds available. But since we exhausted those funds, we are now turning to the American Rescue Plan Act Fund for reimbursement, to reimburse the county for these expenses. These are COVID-related expenses that are not budgeted, that are not funded for the county. So that is why we're seeking reimbursement. Unfortunately, I did not have enough time to prepare the actual budget adjustment portion of the resolution, and I am planning on having that portion prepared and added to the resolution by the executive committee meeting next week. So that's a brief summary of what I've prepared for you.
All right, thank you, Joe. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Onsick? Mr. Martin?
I do. Relative to some of these categories, Joe, for example, the Mill Creek Special Service Area, how does that compute into the loss of revenue in as much as that's a special service area?
Well, they did receive, I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately, but they have a smaller amount of revenue. It's probably the investment revenue.
Okay.
So that as a result of the lower interest rate. So
That makes sense. I couldn't fill that void in my mind's eye. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Ms. Bates?
While we have you, Mr. Onsick, can you explain why the law library would be on this list?
It's because they also experienced a drop in revenue as a result of the impact of COVID. So they did not collect as many fees in 2020 as they normally would have. And so their revenue was reduced. And so this is just to help replenish the loss of fee revenue that they experienced.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Onsick while we still have him? Anyone online that has any questions? His presentation was related to two resolutions that we have coming up. So I just want to make sure everyone has their questions answered. I know Joe has a busy day.
Could we review the meaning of these two resolutions, please?
The meaning of them?
Mhm.
It's what he just covered as far as revenue loss, recoupment, actual revenue loss, and ongoing COVID expenses. Did you have like a more specific question?
I just want to make sure I understand the difference between the two resolutions.
Yeah, so one, the revenue loss recoupment, that's the actual revenue loss we saw.
That's C.
That is C, correct.
Okay, that is the recoupment of lost revenue. So
Yeah.
that's for things like the law library who lost revenue.
Yeah,
Okay.
everything that qualifies as lost revenue under the ARPA is represented in that resolution.
And
And
then-
then B, resolution B is ongoing approved COVID-related expenses that we continue to incur.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Mr. Onzik. I don't know if you're able to stick around, but I think everyone had their questions answered. So I really appreciate all your work on this.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, the next discussion item, application portal update and timeline. Mr. Fonstock is going to explain what we're doing with the portal softwares that we're looking at. Yes, I said softwares, more than one, and why we're doing it. Mr.
Okay.
Fonstock.
I guess it's, is it afternoon? No, it's still morning. Okay, good morning. Roger Fonstock with the County IT Department. And Blair, I'm going to take control of the screen, so I'm going to share real quickly. Hopefully. So from the IT department's perspective, we were asked by Chairman Sanchez and the board to put together an application process for internal applications for funding. That would be for the county offices and departments to have a way to submit to the ARP committee for prospective funds that they may be eligible for. So we were trying to create an application process. It's similar to what we had done for CARES Act, but what we're trying to do is to funnel this through a portal, an online application where they could log in and update their application, provide more documentation if we need them to, and we can also generate reports out of this. So there is potential to use this same system for non-governmental organizations, not-for-profit, potentially business or other organizations. But for now, we were focusing on internal grants, offices, and departments. The other part of what we're looking at is something that's a little bit more comprehensive, a little bit more sophisticated application that if we get into a little bit longer term application process and a little more detailed workflow, we might end up looking at another portal for the small business and the NGOs or not-for-profit. It just provides more scalability and better features and better controls for us in terms of the forms and applications. So on the screen, you have what is the initial internal page for doing a grant application for an office or department in the county. This is not for any outside small business, not for profit at this time. This is the landing page. We would be sending a link to the department heads in an email with instructions for how they would go about doing this, but they basically would create a simple email user account for their office or department. And then it would take them into basically a login screen, which is up in the right-hand corner, and you can log in. One of the nice features about this, and something that we shared with the Office of Community Reinvestment, Scott Berger and them, they've used this, and it allows any of the people that want to preview versus apply to go in and see the actual forms, to see what you're going to respond to before you log in. So I'll click on that and show you kind of the preview of what we have. There's obviously contact information, but you'll see tabs. There's a tab to the left, it's application information. There's questions, budget tables, and then supporting documents to upload. Those are kind of the navigation tools that any office or department would need to pay attention to. So as you go down and look at this, the application questions we'll start with information. It's pretty simple. We're just looking for the department, the project title, the name and contact for the people involved. And then if you switch over to questions, we ask for a brief description, a detailed description. And then we get into checking boxes for the justifications. These are straight from I believe the guidance that we received. So we were asked to divide them up into sections for public health, negative economic impacts, services to disproportionately impacted communities, premium pay, infrastructure, and then revenue replacement and administrative overhead. So you'll see all of those things are corresponding to what the guidance was. And we're asking them to check one or more boxes that tells us what category they believe this program or project would fit into. We're asking them if they can identify a priority. I'm assuming if they're submitting, they're probably all going to say it's a high priority, but we're asking them if they have multiple programs or projects, can they tell us if it is a high priority? Obviously, that's the committee's responsibility probably to determine what's the most highest priority. The next tab is for budget tables. And what we did at this is we asked them to complete based on what our normal budget structure is, wages and benefits, contractual services, commodities, and capital, to provide a budget year for year going out to the potential end year of 2026, which is when the last funds have to be spent and accounted for. So we're not looking for just a dollar figure for a one-time lump sum. It's tell us programmatically how the money would be spent year in and year out. So they have an opportunity to show us a 5-year, 6-year budget plan. The table below that was added, and we're still discussing that, but it's if you can't get the amount you're requested, is there a minimal amount of money to do part of the program? And we're trying to work on some language for how to explain that to someone filling out the application. The last tab outside of the budget is supporting documents, and we're looking for presentations, proposals, or quotes that they could upload and attach to this for the committee's review. So if you have supporting documentation for your budget or for your description or whatever it is that you've submitted so far, we would ask that you attach that, provide it to the committee so you get a little bit more in-depth information. The nice part about this program is that once they're done submitting to this, they can submit multiple applications if they have 2 or more projects. You'll get all of this in a much more concise reporting structure, and we can even do some of the review processes through this, where if we wanted to, we could have each of the ARP committee members jump online, and you could actually review them online and do approvals there. Right now, we're planning on bringing that in the report format, and it'll really be up to the committee and to Chairman Sanchez. So that's really the basics of the internal grant application for election or for elected officials and department heads. We're going to set this up, as I said, in an email distribution. So we'll be sending that out when it's approved through an email to the department heads, elected officials. And then we're also going to provide support for anyone trying to fill out the program applications through our help desk. We'll have some people that can get online and show people how to fill out the application if there's any questions about what they should or shouldn't supply. I think our general answer is going to be supply as much information as you can, and the ARP committee will be there to review it. So if you have any questions about this application process, I'd be happy to try to answer those now, but that's really the part that we wanted to share, is that the application is out and done. Originally, we had told our team that the goal was for this Friday, we would try to have everything wrapped up. And then I think, we talked to Chairman Sanchez about the duration of the application window. And I think that's something that needs to be determined. We'll turn it on, allow people to apply, submit, and then we would turn it off when you basically tell us the end date. And again, the applications for NGO, not-for-profit business, that's I think still yet to be determined. We need a kind of a schedule and an outline of what the ARP committee would want us to include. And again, we're looking at some other potential solutions. So that's all we have for this morning. If you have any questions.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Noticing the application for the budget, can we go to that page,
Yes.
please?
Sure.
And if we go down to the minimal amount,
Yes.
I assume by good stewardship of our department heads, that they would only be requesting what is needed and making a minimal amount to run a program may be ineffective because it would give you the baseline of maybe only running the program for a year or 2 years. What I would suggest as an addition to that or an amended report is part of the requirement for some of the application for the grants under public engagement includes other community support. So what are their community partners, other municipalities, other government agencies or not-for-profits? They may be developing partnerships with those so that each one of our municipalities, as we know, has also been given some resources from the rescue plan. And we need to reach out to them. So if we're impacting, for instance, a program in Elgin, and we're giving $1,000 as an example, will the city of Elgin also contribute 250 to that? So I believe that that kind of research needs to be done so we know that there is support going through the entire county as we expend our money. We cannot fund, we don't have the resources as much as I wish we had to fund all these needed projects to go back out to community as well as internal projects that will serve our community. So we have to be able to develop partnerships. And I believe that is the job of our department heads to seek those out pretty quickly as they look through developing their programs.
Mr. Martin?
Well, and continuing that point, I think it's important for all of our applications that we have available to us knowledge of what other resources either are available, have already been utilized. So we know that the money that we disperse isn't A, going to be redundant, or B, is not being dispersed in lieu of other available funds.
I agree.
I think we could add, would we want to add a list of maybe community partners just to identify who they are? And then if they're contributing the amount of money that they are contributing, and we could do it in a budget table like this, or we could do it in just a list of agencies that are supporting this project and how much they would contribute to supporting it.
Either way, but it should go on a
Okay.
budget table because it is part of total budget. So if the project is $1,000 all in for the cost of
Okay.
this, and we have $250 coming once again, for example, from the city of Elgin, their ask from our point is only going to be $750 rather than the $1,000.
I'm going to sit down with, I think it's Davis who's
Yeah.
putting this together for us
So-
before we open this portal. So all of your input
Yeah.
and ideas will be considered.
We have one of our application developers here, Matt Meyer. He helped develop this. Matt's back
There he
in
is.
the back listening attentively, I'm sure.
He's taking notes. All right.
Yeah.
Mr. Tippy.
Roger, have you thought about adding on to it a status associated with it? Has this been accepted, rejected? Okay, and if so, what part was funded? So if this is all meant to be the only database, or is there going to be a separate database of what was funded and then items would be removed from this, or at least marked as that they've been accepted or rejected?
Sure. So this is the application side of it. The actual administration side of it does much of what you're talking about. It provides the reports, the dashboard view of what's been approved, what's not been approved. It even provides a reviewer process, so you can add multiple reviewers to it, and the reviewers can log in and see the status. This is applied, this is being reviewed, this has been accepted, and it'll even tell you if you want to do partial, amounts or partial awards, things like that. So this is more just getting it into the hands of the people filling it out. And then I do think that once we get data, we'll need to figure out what tools this committee wants in terms of reports, visibility to it. Do they want to, log in and actually look at the stuff online, or do you want just generate a report and hand it out? We can do that. It does do email notifications. So when I logged in or when I created my account, it sends me my account information. And when I submit or start an application, it tells me you have an unfinished application or you finished the application, it's completed. Here's a copy of your application for reference. But it does a lot of those things as a part of the program. Yeah.
And we will be using, we're looking at a more advanced software, portal software for all the external type grant programs.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about the short-term social service grant program, that's what we're looking at utilizing. It takes a little bit longer to put that together. So this is ready to go right now and could be used for all of our purposes. But as Roger and I have discussed, we may run into some shortcomings with this software. And we'd rather have a smooth experience for everyone involved, especially when we're dealing with community organizations. So this is going to be for the department side, and then we're working on opening up the public side in the next, I think, 4 weeks or so. It's going to take a little time to put together. Madam Chair, I saw your hand go up first.
Thank you. Going back to the application, and I'm just taking a look at what the requirements are for the ARP funding. On that application, do we have a category that our department heads would have to fill out, and this would all be replicated for our grants going out to our social service providers with the data? How does this impact the needs of our community? Are we funding a program that's going to service 80 people? Is this program going to have outreach to however many people? And what is the need for this? Because this program, the rescue plan, is all based on data. We can't just say because we need it. Why do we need it? We have to have population numbers on there.
So you can add that. I don't think that was a part of the original application requirements that we worked on with Mr. Chairman
It
Sanchez.
has to be included.
So you're looking for a justification statement or?
Literally what we need data. Is this going to impact 1,000 people? Is this going to impact 400 people?
Yeah, and Madam Chair, this is something I considered putting on, and I was just thinking what would be a good way to do it, because otherwise that would be in the proposal that they would submit to us. We would want that information in the proposal itself. But we can have an actual section on the application if you'd like.
I think it's critically important that we know where their data is coming from.
I agree.
And that would be separate from, and just another question.
So you had,
Sure. Go
we
ahead.
can talk about that after the
Yeah,
meeting
yeah,
or
that's fine.
whenever you're ready.
Absolutely. Mr. Sturgis?
Not a member of the committee, Jared. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. From the CAC experience and being integral with the small business grant, the amount of time that was spent just trying to communicate to people was cumbersome. I think Fabiola will never want to speak with me again after trying to contact her time and again. So Roger, in terms of the next iteration of this forward facing to the community, I mean, having some status bar on there that indicates you are missing this document, you are missing that document. Here's where you're at in the process so that we can point them specifically. I can't tell you the number of phone calls that I forwarded to Mr. Hoshite and then Mr. Sanchez and then Scott Berger and then Fabiola. And it's just such an incredible waste of time that they could be productive actually doing the business rather than answering questions that a software package could identify for us. So Vern, I think that's where you may have been going with this. I may be mistaken, but that to me is just, wherever this goes, that would be so crucial.
Sure.
Yeah, and to your point, Mr. Sturgis, the public facing portal, public side portal, the software we're looking at, if this is a very reliable Nissan or Toyota, the other one we're looking at is a little bit more than that. It's a Tesla, perhaps, an affordable Tesla. Yeah.
If I could, this is actually a screen of what you see as a
Even
applicant,
nonetheless.
and it shows you incomplete applications, approved applications, declined applications, submitted, archived. So this is kind of what they see. This was myself logging in just to test, and it shows an incomplete application. I just logged in and started one, but I never actually typed anything in. So it just shows as incomplete under my applications over here. That's kind of what the end user will see. They'll see that part.
Thanks.
Isn't, I think that will be effective.
Again, this was our first time ever doing this, blind leading the blind. We don't know what we don't know. Let's learn from the experience. And if somebody calls, I would love to just be able to say, did you log into your portal and what did it say? Before I go picking up the phone and trying to chase somebody down for you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
If
absolutely.
it says it's waiting for your blah, 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 did you turn blah, blah, blah in?
Mhm.
Oh, no, I didn't know I needed that. Well, I don't know how you didn't know that. If I can see it, you can see it.
Yeah, and as we're looking at consultant firms to hire, that's one of the things we're gonna want them to be able to do is help us create some kind of, webinar or FAQ, some sort of informational materials for entities that are applying, and also provide some kind of help desk support so that if there is somebody that can't get their questions answered by all the other materials we have available, they can talk to somebody within a reasonable amount of time so that we don't run into the situation we had last year. Mr. Hunt? Just use the microphone.
I'm here on behalf of the sheriff, and obviously he's interested in this portal development. A couple of things that as Roger was going through that I noticed, a question that I anticipate the sheriff will pose to me, and I want to be able to answer it correctly, is on the user side, can we have multiple users within the same office or department? Or is there a single user for that purpose?
You should be able to have multiple users. I would just suggest that you use the same department name, making sure that they're kind of uniform names so we can identify which department they are. If they're a sub-department of like the King County Sheriff's Office, just making sure that we can identify which parent organization they're in. Sometimes we get sub-departments that take on an identity and we don't know which elected official they're actually under without starting to dig deeper. So as long as we have some department descriptions, we should be fine.
Okay. And two other points, if I might, to Madam Chairman's original question regarding the allocation of dollars. Within the Just Grants application process, they identify upfront the amount of money that's being applied for from a specific grant. And then if there are other funding sources to come to that net budget, which I think is a good point. And then to Cliff's question there, again, within the Just Grants process, when you make an application and you think you've gone through the entire checklist of items and hit the submit button, if there's anything that's incomplete, it stops you at that point. It doesn't give you an incomplete. It won't accept the application. So that may be another way for your potential applicants to make sure they know they're on track.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Bates?
For having the department names, how about a drop-down menu so that they're not
We could look
putting
into
in
that.
funny names, like maybe abbreviations or something. A drop-down menu would make it easier to figure out who's who. I think.
Do that. Yeah,
Okay.
we can look into that. Yeah.
All right.
that's-
He is just scribbling away back there in the corner. Holy
Yeah. I think sometimes with the department names, we look at the budget book and the budget codes. That's usually how we define.
Oh, okay.
So it's a fund and a department. And I know finance appreciates that because that's really the cost center for, where the money is coming and going from for revenue and expenses. So we might look at what fund or budget you're working out of. Sometimes that tells us more than the actual text.
So a drop-down menu. with the
Yeah,
budget.
what fund are you in? Because that tells a lot about who
Great.
the department is.
Okay, good.
All right, any other questions on the portal application? Okay, so our tentative goal is this Friday, 27th, to open it up. Like I said, I'm going to be working with our guys to incorporate some of these ideas, just get everything finalized so that hopefully we can release it on Friday, and all the departments who I know have been patiently waiting to submit will be able to do so.
And I'm sorry, if we're opening it up, are we going to close?
Yes, we had previously discussed opening it for a 2-week window. So I think that would still be adequate unless departments come back to us and say they need more time. We're still early in our planning process. We don't know where the total allocation amount is going to land for departmental requests. So we do have a little bit of a luxury in time that we can extend that deadline longer if we need to.
I would say that 3 weeks is, especially if we're adding potential funding partners that have to be included with that, Jarrett. That's going to take some research and work for their end. And these are long-term. We may even want to extend it out for a full month before we start looking at that, because that's going to take, they're going to have to do some homework to be able to get those numbers.
Yeah, so I'll be in
arranged.
touch with department heads and elected officials to see if, what a reasonable
Right.
timeline will be.
You
for
could do a rolling application too, or you just accept them until you determine,
Yeah.
that way you don't have like a hard stop, but then you get the offices that procrastinate, so.
Yeah, it's good to have a deadline, but we can keep it open as well. We have that luxury at this point in time. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Roger. I'm going to move one discussion item up, the future meeting calendar, because it's something I'll reference in the other two discussion items. So I will share that with you right now, so that have it, because I will mention some of these dates. So we've talked about it before, doing a bi-weekly schedule. And so here is the schedule. So you can put it in your calendars. If there is a need, a cause for emergency meetings in between these, if we have to approve something like that falls within a certain timeline for our committee track, then we will do so. But otherwise, if all we have is just a quick update on a few things at some of these meetings, this is the schedule. So you guys can put it in. It's just every 2 weeks on Wednesday from this date.
Can you send that out to us, Jared?
Yeah, I will send all materials that I have today.
What time?
Well, it depends on what meetings are that day. So if we have finance, it'll be at 10:30. But if we have, let's see, admin and human services, then we'll probably start at about 11:30.
Okay, so when you send out the notice, that will include the time that the meeting's going to start?
Yeah, I can put that together as well for you. It'll always be following the regularly scheduled committee meetings that we have.
Okay.
Has everybody got that for now? I will send this out, so don't worry if I change the screen on you. Okay. All right, so next discussion point, the social service grants. I have a little PowerPoint presentation for actually E and F. I'm going to combine them into one presentation, but I will pause for questions in between the two. Okay, so here's the update on where we're at on some things. I think the one question a lot of you may have is, where are we going? I want to put a little humorous twist on it. This again is different than the CARES Act. I talked a little bit about that earlier. It's got a different timeline. There's a lot more going on to it. So it might seem like things aren't moving along, but I can assure you, between myself, Madam Chair, and others, we have been having internal meetings with different organizations and entities, putting information together so that once we bring our consultant firm on board, we will be able to develop a comprehensive plan. So that's ultimately where we're going. So everything I'm going to talk about today is just what we can do in the meantime as we are working towards this comprehensive plan. Now, there is a lot of conversation about how we may use these funds. And so while I don't have the specifics, how much we're going to put in each bucket, that will be our plan. I created this little graphic for you to kind of visually understand the general way that our comprehensive plan will work. So you have there in the middle, this little solar system here, but in the middle, you have the ARPA fund. That's $103 million that we're getting in total. And the white lines are going to the main bucket categories that we have. So administrative costs, COVID related, expenses, payroll reimbursement, departmental requests, revenue recoupment, and community support grants and projects. Now, this is not an extensive list, but those are the main categories where everything else will fall under. So the white arrows are the direct lines of money that are going to go from the ARPA fund into these buckets. Now, the gray arrows, that's where we have some more secondary movements of this money. So in particular, looking at the revenue recoupment, when some people hear, well, the county might take all of the revenue recoupment money that is allowable, it does not automatically mean that it's just going to get sucked up into quote unquote government services. So you can see here, it'll go into departmental requests, but it'll also go into some of these community support grants and projects, things that we may come up with, ideas that we may come up with to address needs in the community, but we may determine at a certain point, okay, we took 7 million for revenue recoupment. We're only going to use 4.5 for actual lost revenue. Well, we may determine that extra 2.5 million goes into some of these community support grants and projects. So it's all tentative. This is just a basic map for people to understand, in a quick way, how this money works. And then the other aspect of this that there was some misunderstanding is the payroll reimbursement. So when people look at, $20 million that will go to the sheriff, it's not an additional amount of money that's going to the sheriff. It's a payroll reimbursement, just like we had last year with the CARES Act, which means once we accept that reimbursement, that money goes directly to the general fund. Last year, we created the COVID savings special reserve fund where all the reimbursement money went into. And I imagine that is something we're going to do again this year or with this program. So this is just a way for everyone to understand where we're going, generally speaking, and how, even though it might sound scary, the idea of revenue recoupment, it's not a simple, it's just going to go to government services. There's a lot of things that we can do with it. And obviously, we've talked about partnering with municipalities. So that would be another planet coming off of community support grants and projects. So again, this is not a completely extensive list, just a rough outline for you. So today, we're just going to talk about two aspects of this: the departmental requests and then the community support grants and projects. So the idea we've come up with is to create a short-term program because we are still in the planning phase. We don't want to get too far ahead of that. We don't know how much money is going to go into each one of those buckets and for what projects we're going to want to fund with them. But recognizing there is a short-term need out there, recognizing that we still have a lot of information to gather on those needs, we wanted to put something together in a short-term, small dollar amount that can go out in fourth quarter of this year. So hopefully by Christmas, we can have some checks going out to organizations. So first step would be today to decide upon an allocation. We don't need a resolution to do it, just an agreement between us. How much are we going to put into the short-term fund? So I'm going to propose a number to you, a small number range, and it is much smaller than you might think when you think how much we're going to spend overall for these kinds of projects. So brace yourself. It's not going to be the whole package. So I'm recommending that we decide on something between $1.5 to $2 million. And this is just to get us started. This is to start the engine. We're going to have our portal software in place within about a month. So we can work out all the bugs with that on a much smaller program than we might devise later on. And the comprehensive plan will include much more. So again, this is just, it's not even a round one. It's just recognizing the immediate needs out there. And this is not even going to touch a small portion of all those immediate needs. But again, we have to do our due diligence. We have to look at all the factors, all the needs that exist. We have to back up our decisions with as much data as we can. This is not the CARES Act. It's a whole other animal. So we need more time. And that's when the consultant firm and the program manager gets on board. We are going to have a not astronomically larger amount of resources, but a much larger amount of resources at our disposal to make sure that we are doing that due diligence, so that as we develop more long-term strategies for funding social services and other community organizations, we'll be able to do that very wisely. Step 2 will be stakeholder meetings. So that is something we're going to be organizing very soon. Tentative dates, and again, this could all change. This is an adaptive plan. This is something that will change as needed, especially once the consultant comes on board. But I think it's reasonable to assume that in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we can put together a meeting of these organizations via Zoom. So September 15th and 16th, separating social services and homeless shelters and food pantries. So these are the categories that we'd like to start with and to look at and go over what their needs are. Be focused discussions, talking primarily about short-term needs, regarding this program, but we also are going to gather as much information as we can on the long-term needs that these types of organizations have, as well as discussing any opportunities that may come up in the conversation for collaboration with each other, and then in thinking about behavioral health services, ideas that we may have to collaborate with the health department to help move money and provide services. And then after the stakeholder meeting, we'll create a written report that will be given to the community or to the committee that will recommend just some basic recommendations based on the meetings of what our selection criteria for the grant may be, as well as potential allocation amounts for each category. How much do we want to give to homeless shelters? How much do we want to give to social services, and so on? Step 3 in this plan, committee review and opening of the portal. So at the September 26th or 22nd meeting, assuming this is the schedule we will be able to keep to with all these things, we will discuss all of the findings from the meetings, the stakeholder meetings, and then go over what we think should be the grant criteria, so that we can then open the portal, ideally in early October, open it for 3 weeks, longer if we need to, if it is determined that there is a need for a longer opening period for the portal. In step 4, we will select the award amounts. And I envision it being similar to the Riverboat Grant Committee, where some recommendations will be given to get the party started, so to speak. And then we'll meet over 1 or 2 meetings to go over allocations, specific award amounts. Maybe we want to move 300,000 from here to over there, whatever the case may be. That's the process we'll go through over a couple meetings. And then step 5, quarter 4 disbursement. Once we select the award amounts for each applicant, we will then be able to forward all of the information over to our consultant firm for approval. They have to go through all the documentation, verify eligibility on everything, request paperwork or any other information that might be missing, working with the applicants to get all of that done, so that, fingers crossed, we can send checks out throughout December. And then our long-term planning for social service assistance. And I imagine that by December, we will have our comprehensive plan put together, and we'll know at least a good number that is going to go towards these kinds of programs. And with the information we get from the stakeholder meetings, we will have a lot of fuel for these conversations, so that we can talk about what our long-term strategy is going to be for helping these groups out. Are there any questions on this? Madam Chair.
Thank you. Could you go back to your slide where you talk about the agencies that we're considering funding? Sorry, thank you. It concerns me that that is a small amount of money to fund all of those needs. Homeless shelters and food pantries could be able to use that $2 million within one application process, leaving very little money for social services. It's a big pool, and we talked about that before, and I think we have to be very tactical with the pool. And it's also very important for all of our nonprofit agencies to realize that we have to confirm that this should not go into payroll, but should go into capital expenses and other expenses that will last a longer period of time than just salaries. So if we're looking at we've had requests here to support mental health providers. Once that money dries out, that money is gone. But can there be applications for other availabilities to support mental health, whatever those may be, through those agencies, and they would know what those would be. Computer software, the idea of buying a motel to support homeless individuals is in line with this funding. So we have to be very cautious when we start supporting that. And $2 million to support all of that is modest. I mean, just incredibly modest. And as you know, I'm fiscally conservative when it comes to other people's money, and this is other people's money. But this is something that if we're going to be doing it and having everybody go through, our community partners go through the time, effort, and energy developing a grant program and getting the partnership, I think we should do it well and not consider it just a short-term grant, but a grant opportunity that's going to be funding them. Because are we going to be going through that as a committee to go back and review applications again? I'm just putting that out there, that if we're going to be doing it, let's do it effectively, let's do it well, and let's stand strong.
Yeah, as you and I discussed this concept, I thought it in our best interest to include homeless shelters and food pantries because they are addressing, they are dealing with people and helping people that really do need help ongoing. We want to use this money as much as we can for more long-term uses, things that will outlive the spending of this money. But also in this plan is language that says short-term needs should be addressed as well. And we just don't know, obviously, any of these categories could suck up $5 to $10 million quite easily. That I think we're all pretty certain of. I envision this process as something that helps us just get the conversation started, gathering information, and then for this small grant program, we can look at, okay, we're not going to be able to give you $500,000, but how does $50,000 help your mission? We have to also look at the eligible uses for this money, because my understanding is there are certain capital expenses that are not covered as an eligible expense for various nonprofits and organizations. So that's something that we have to do a little bit more homework on to make sure that when we select our criteria for this program, we are falling within those eligibility categories. And we'll be able to, before anybody applies, they'll know, okay, yeah, I can't ask for this type of request, but I can ask for this type of request. But we'll still know ongoing for our long-term planning what the other needs that these organizations have are.
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman,
Bates.
is this subject to debate that we could maybe make this 5 million instead of 2 million, which would still be a small fraction of the total amount, but it seems like this is going to be, I know this is almost a pilot program for the big event, the big disbursements, and yet it's going to be a lot of work for the groups that are applying. May I suggest 5 million instead of 2 million?
Well, I mean,
I
certainly.
can
this is-
suggest anything I
this is-
want,
yes.
I guess.
We could suggest 103 if we'd like. So this is a conversation that we need to have today. Mr. Martin?
Having been involved with the CAC committee, one of our appropriate and obligatory concerns was that we be able to monitor the expenditure of the funds and make certain that we were meeting through our distributions necessary requirements, because it would come back to the county if we were not, in fact, doing it correctly. And I understand the chairman's point and Mavis's point, but we're in the process of beginning to put together standards. And when I in my mind, I evaluate what not only the technical risk might be if we're not correct, but the practical aspect of maybe heading off in the wrong direction because we just haven't quite matured the process yet. I'd like to keep the money reasonably small because it is a pilot program and because we are, I don't want to use the word feeling our way through it because we're not. We're going to have consultants and we're going to be deliberate in the process, but I'd like to have the rollout be small enough so that we can recognize things like, Cliff made a point before, we had issues with people not being able to figure out if they filled out the forms correctly and that type of thing. I would feel better with the amount you suggest than increasing the risk of either procedural issues or mistakes because the process hadn't gelled yet enough for us to know. And I think we're going to have to, what we maybe need to recognize in the short term is that we may need to identify a more narrow list of what in fact short-term issues are. Maybe it's, and so rather than increase the money, look at what we think to be the most catastrophic events, focus on them, get our feet on the ground, and then be able to move forward perhaps on a broader basis. I don't know if anybody's going to put together a capital project between now and October. But there certainly are going to be identifiable issues that we could address that give us a chance to move into this without leaping off the bridge and hoping there's water in the river.
Hold on, Madam Chair. Mr. Frost.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, are you looking for a consensus today on that number?
Yeah, I think it would be good to do that today. We don't have to. We can hold these stakeholder meetings at any time, but I do want to do those soon. And if it's the will of the committee, we can come back in 2 weeks and revisit this allocation amount, if that's something that everyone is more comfortable
I
with.
appreciate what Mr. Martin's saying, but I also agree with other comments that, there are some emergency situations out there. Now, we have to keep in mind that, if we put a certain amount of money in a pot, doesn't mean we have to spend it. And I would rather be able to not use it all than to wish we'd put more in the pot. So as far as consensus for today, I would ask my committee members to support a $4 million amount in the emergency fund. We're not making motions, but I'll throw that out there.
Mr. Tepe, you had your hand up.
I didn't want to address that point, but or
If you
let
had
me
another
address
point.
yes, let me address a different point. I don't think there is any service organization or combination of service organizations that couldn't come in and justify a large part of this amount just for their organization. But we have a health department that works with all of these service organizations and knows them. And I would like to see the health department involved in assisting us in determining what's the way the money goes. They know where the needs are, they know where the gaps are, and they can help advise the committee rather than the committee or the individual members listening to a service organization that they may or may not know. So we've got some people there that really know this. Let's get them involved in the process and give them some advice.
So I'm a little ahead of you on that point. I've spoken with Michael Isaacson on this idea, and he was willing to take part in these stakeholder meetings to just be a guest there and be a part of the conversation. And also, as we go through, like I said, we'll have a little written report that'll just be a summary and some suggestions for the committee to consider. He'll be helpful in putting that together as well. And then through the whole process. Now, for the long-term planning for these services, there is another idea that he has that I know I've spoken with some of you privately, that's still being worked out. That will be a part of the departmental request that the health department has. What's that?
I also like that idea.
Yeah. And so, nothing is set in stone yet, so I don't want to speak too much and get ahead of that. But the health department being a big part of this is certainly something that I'm looking at going
Mr.
forward.
Chair.
Hold on, Madam Chair, I'll come back to you. Oh, Mr. Brown, you had a question. You haven't asked anything
Well,
yet.
maybe a comment, not a question. Knowing that this is just a short term at this point until the comprehensive plan is created and up and running, I would like to see us keep it at the lower side of the, expenditures. But I do like Mr. Froz's comment that we don't have to spend it all just because we say we're going to appropriate this much money at this point in time. I was initially in favor of $2 million. I know Madam Chair is pushing for $5 million. But because of Mr. Franz's thought of we don't have to spend it all, I would support the 4 million, which would give some more flexibility to this plan at this point in time.
One thing I would add to that, if we say we're going to do 4 million, then we come back and only do 2, that could create some contention, just something to consider. Mr. Martin?
I would hope that by the time we schedule the stakeholders meetings, that we do it and be able to provide the stakeholders some instructions so that there are just not a series of presentations made that may or may not strike the nail on the head. You know, if there are things that we feel appropriate as expenditures, then let's have the presentations based on those goals. Because if we have 30 people all without direction, we're gonna get a mishmash of needs that are gonna be very difficult for us to address.
Yeah, and to that point, we'll have some information to provide all of the attendees using the eligible uses. That's really where the conversation has to be contained within, because I'm sure there are a lot of other needs that these organizations have that don't fall within the eligible uses of the ARPA. So that will be a good way to structure the conversation so that we're not.
So there's some structure to it. And to Mr. Brown's point, I'm willing to live with repercussions if we, on a rational basis, determine we're not going to disperse the entire 4 million for whatever the reason might be. So I would, to get the issue off the dime, I would join Drew's suggestion for the 4. Just let's move it forward and begin the process.
Madam Chair.
I was going to concur with Mr. Martin. Any decision that this committee makes has got to be based on the criteria set forth by the Treasury Department. And we cannot even propose getting any grant application out there without making sure that that is exactly targeted towards that. Because once again, it's an awful lot of work to put these proposals together, and we want all of them to be successful. But again, it has to be based on data. We have to have hardcore data on any of these applications on the impact that it's had upon the community and future impact on service needs. So it cannot be wants. We want this because of, we need this because the community is being impacted currently.
And that's a very good point. This is not a situation where we're servicing wants at all with this money. Everything that we spend ARPA money on should be needs.
And will,
Much as we
I'm
possibly
sorry,
can.
just logistically, and then I'll stop. Will you be able to have the data required to make it very specific for our not-for-profit agencies? Will it be determined on what we're looking at as this committee wants to fund? The areas of
So I
funding.
think that the starting point will be just the eligible uses that could be applied for. Let's have a conversation, what the short-term needs are, the long-term needs are, and then come back to the committee and say, okay, here's all of the things that they came back with. What do we want to fund?
So the short-term needs is what we're going to be speaking about on the 15th and the 16th.
That'll be the primary point of conversation.
Should be the only point. Because if there's going to be additional grants that are coming up, long-term needs are going to be separate.
We could consider holding multiple stakeholder meetings for different aspects. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not on the committee. I was thinking, since this is a short-term situation, maybe we could put a limit on the award for any outside organization that needs it of maybe $50,000. If you did $50,000 as just an initial short-term grant, I think what you're going to do is you're going to be able to satisfy 30, 40, 50 agencies at a $50,000 maximum limit. And that might give them the idea that this is just for this short-term period. We're not looking for the next 2 or 3 years. You can apply for more. But at this juncture, we're only going to allocate maybe up to $50,000 per per organization that makes a request. And I can't see where any of these organizations would be hindered by the fact that they have to fill out an application if they're looking at receiving $50,000.
Mr. Chair.
I think it's not a bad point. The only concern I have there is there's just a lot of data we don't have yet. We haven't had these meetings, and to create a somewhat arbitrary limitation, we might realize, well, that kind of creates a barrier that we want to then eliminate. And we might want to go back and say, okay, this organization has a much larger scope, and $100,000 or $200,000 would be more appropriate in the eyes of the committee, where a smaller organization wouldn't even need $25,000 as far as eligible uses are concerned. So I wouldn't want to arbitrarily limit it in that way. I think just having the general allocation, going to the stakeholders, gathering that information, doing that reconnaissance, and then coming back and seeing what we have, and then from there making a more informed decision about how we want to do it. Because we're going to talk about the stakeholder meetings before we open up the portal. So once we open up that portal, then if we decide, yeah, hey, $50,000 per application will be good because the information we got back says so, then that's something that we can determine at that point.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Brown.
Yeah, thank you. One more comment. I think it's important to remember that there's a lot of other monies that has been distributed to municipalities and other agencies that can be applied for through these other needy agencies. And I think on the application process, we should ask that, have you applied for any other money from any other agency, and were you approved or denied, and for what reason? Because I think it's important that XYZ agency doesn't come just to the county. They need to look everywhere they can to get the funding they need, which will enable us also then to be able to distribute more around the entire area. And also the collaboration, we need to be looking at that as well, where if XY agency is looking for $10,000, maybe the committee says, well, we could kick in 5,000 if you got 5,000 from somebody else in order to be able to get your 10,000 that you need. So I just think there's a lot to this, and that's why I think it's important that we get something out there quickly. But through this whole process, we're going to have to come up with all these great ideas.
Yeah, my personal inclination is anyone that asks us for money, that's a question we should be asking them. Have you talked to anyone else to help supplement this? That's a very common question in grants. With the riverboat, for instance, is this the only source of funding? Because if it is, it doesn't help, at least for the riverboat grant. But yes, point well taken. If organization in Carpentersville, wants 50,000 from us, I want to know, did you go to Carpentersville and ask for some money too?
Right.
So, Mr. Martin, and then I'll come to you, Madam Chair.
I think also we need to remember that although the vast majority of our residents live within city limits, we have a whole group of people who are within anybody's municipal boundaries. So Batavia, Geneva, Aurora, Elgin, they're all getting money, not to the agricultural community. We got to make sure that we figure out a way to properly represent their interests in this conversation too, just overall.
Absolutely. And I think as we start determining our criteria after the stakeholder meetings, I imagine we're going to want to give some preference to organizations that cover the entire county and not just a specific area as well. Madam Chair.
Again, there's so many wonderful questions to ask as we dive down deep into this rabbit hole. I do believe that our not-for-profits who are helping with mental health reach out to those communities that are in the unincorporated areas as well. They're not just specifically funded, but to your point, if we're asking them to do partnership relationships, financial partnership relationships with other municipalities, will that funding then be restricted just to those residents within the municipality? And if that's the case, we can just adjust their budget allocation to make sure that there is appropriate amount of money to serve individuals in an unincorporated area. And that would just be what percentage of that grant would go to serve those people in Elgin, what percentage in unincorporated Elgin.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
I'd like to agree
Biggs.
that the $50,000 limit might be too restrictive.
Yeah, that's something we can
Mhm.
discuss later on.
Sure.
So it seems that popular opinion on the committee is to go with a $4 million allocation. Is there anyone who would disagree with that at this point?
I would just like to go on the record for 5.
Do I hear 4.5 million?
I believe I'm already on the record for 5, but I think 4 would be a pretty good number.
Okay, it sounds like $4 million is a good place to start. We can go back and increase that later on if we want to, but this is just something to at least get the conversation started, make some traction happen, and get involved with these organizations to find out what their needs are. So we will definitely be coming back to that as we go along. Okay, for the next portion, it should be a little shorter. This is for the departmental requests. So step 1, open the portal. I don't know why it seemed like a battle cry. Maybe some of the department heads feel it that way, but open the portal. So ideally, we open it August 27th, and then this is a 2-week timeline right here. But if we want to just keep it open or extend it, we can figure that out as we go along, and we get some feedback from our department heads. Step 2, review internally and report to the committee. So once everything comes in, we'll take a look at it. We'll see what's there. We'll categorize things by different, general ARPA uses, revenue recoupment, payroll reimbursement. We might get things that are ineligible. Then make some initial recommendations and a very initial category allocation amount. So how much do we want to spend in each of these categories? We can't get too far into those woods though, because we need our consultant firm in place to help us in creating our comprehensive plan. But having all of the requests in is going to be great to just look at and say, okay, this is what everybody wants. Now, where do we go from here? So we'll have a committee review process. If this is the schedule we'll keep to for these processes, then at the September 22nd meeting is when we'll have our discussion. If we need to keep the portal open, then we'll move this discussion to the following meeting. And then we'll just talk about what we think. We'll have all of the numbers there for everyone to look at, whether we're logging into the portal ourselves. We'll have reports generated so we can see what's there and just start hashing out ideas. Nothing set in stone, just, hey, I like this, I don't like that. And it'll probably give some food for thought to department heads when we have this conversation. Maybe I want to amend my application, my request. And then over 4 meetings, again, if we keep to a certain schedule, it'll be these meetings. We'll have the department heads come in and present. I wanted to do it over 4 meetings, assuming they're all going to want to come in and ask for something, because we want to give them adequate amount of time to present their ideas, to make their arguments, and allow for appropriate questions to be asked and things of that nature. And I don't want to clog up entire meetings with just presentations and Q&A. We'll have other things during these meetings that we'll need to discuss and vote on. But again, the comprehensive plan hopefully will be determined during this time period. So once we have that comprehensive plan, that will very much inform our considerations when we get to this step, selecting the award amounts. Again, very similar to Riverboat, we'll do it over a few meetings. We'll have some internal recommendations that we give to the committee to start with, and we'll hash it out over ideally 2 meetings, maybe more if we need to. But then afterwards, once we have our award amounts for each department selected and voted on, we'll establish a specific funding timeline for each of these projects. Keeping in mind, we only have the $51.3 million right now that it's already been drawn down from, and we don't get that second tranche until May of next year, and probably late May of next year. So we'll have to plot all of the projects out on a timeline to look at when do we give each project a certain amount of money. If we do something like broadband, for instance, that's going to be a multi-year project. So that's going to have a very long-term timeline, whereas more simple departmental request, it may be just a one-time thing that we can take care of this year or early in next year. Any questions on that process? Madam Chair.
We just have to be careful and mindful of the fact that once this committee approves whatever allocation, that it has to go through the board process.
Yes, absolutely.
So that may take 30 to 60 days before a check actually can be issued.
Any other questions or comments?
It's a long road.
Okay, I think that's it for me then. We've covered the two main points, and unless there's anything else that anyone has to add to any of this, we can move on to the resolutions and then lunch. All right, so first resolution, if I can get a motion in a second to approve the authorization of emergency purchase affidavit for limited engagement of consultant to meet August 31st, 2021 ARPA reporting deadlines. Mr. Martin moves, Bates seconds. On this, we did an emergency purchase affidavit for KEB. We couldn't go through the committee timeline to get this done by our deadline. So we did the emergency purchase, and this is just the official ratification of that. Paperwork's been signed, KEB is performing services, and that's all this is. So unless there's any questions or comments, clerk, please call the roll.
Bates,
Bates, yes.
Brown,
Brown, yes.
Frost,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Strothman,
Strathman, yes.
and Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, next one, if I get a motion in a second to approve authorizing reimbursement of county COVID-19 related expenses from American Rescue Plan Fund and related budget adjustment, which was not included, but we will be seeing at the executive committee meeting. This is for the ongoing COVID related expenses. Mr. Froz moves, Mr. Martin seconds. Any questions or comments? Well, we already had that section of the meeting, so hopefully nobody's got anything new. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Bates, Brown,
Yes.
Frost,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Strothman,
Strathman, yes.
and Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, and if I can get a motion and second authorizing allocation of recoupment of lost revenue under the American Rescue Plan Act, FY21 budget adjustment and related transfers. Mr. Brown moves, Mr. Martin seconds. Again, I don't think we have any questions or comments. Clerk, please call the roll.
Bates, Brown,
Yes.
Frost,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Strothman,
Strathman, yes.
and Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, no need for there's nothing under old business, no need for executive session.
Mr.
If
Chairman, I
could-
just got a
Oh,
question.
Mr. Frost.
Clarification, really just, Madam Chairman mentioned the dates of the 15th and the 16th. Is that the public hearing?
That's just a tentative date schedule for the stakeholder meetings.
Okay, so
For
that's
the
should be
short-term
announced
grant program.
officially. Thank you.
Saw some motion. I thought there was a hand waving, but it was your fanning. Okay. Like, man, somebody's got something to say out there. All right. Anybody else have anything, any comments they'd like to make before we adjourn? I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Mr. Brown moves, Ms. Strathman seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.